Jon Stewart returned to The Daily Show last night just in time for the big Biden pardoning Hunter Biden debacle. And he had, I think, a now fairly characteristically nuanced take on it. And some takeaways, perhaps, for the Democrats. If they're wise, this situation that doesn't seem to be doing them any favors in the news cycle, maybe there's something to be learned there. So I just want to read a little bit of what Jon had to say. He said, hypocrisy isn't illegal, nor is it particularly unusual in politics. Yeah, here. It's not like he's ever going to run again, Joe Biden, so why not take care of your kid, even if you said you weren't going to? I respect it. I don't have a problem with it. The problem is the rest of the Democrats made Biden's pledge to not pardon Hunter the foundation of their defense of America. And he played a long mashup of all of the times that they focused on it and drilled down on it. And it does make some of them look a little bit silly in hindsight, although I do think at the time when Joe Biden was saying, I'm not gonna pardon my son, that was an admirable move. There's not many politicians that I would necessarily expect would make that sort of promise. Now, he went back on it. So as long as you're willing to be somewhat critical of him now, you can be consistent. Of course, some of the Democrats aren't willing to do that. But that said, Jon goes on to say, at every turn, Democrats keep getting caught creating a purity test for a system that they can't seem to pass themselves. And that's the beginning of, like, I think the two-part lesson for the Democrats, that if you are going to hold yourselves up as being morally superior to the other side, which I think you should and can, because the other side blows chunks, metaphorically speaking, ideologically speaking, you do like whatever the standard you say there is, you have to hold to that. You're deciding what those standards are. You're the ones that are holding up these norms as if they should mean something, and I hope in some future world they will. Well, then you do have to live up to those. And that's sort of the fundamental problem of Joe Biden. It's not fundamentally that he did the pardon, it's that months and months and months went by of I'm not gonna do the pardon. But maybe much more importantly, and then we'll discuss, Jon also said it's hard. Democrats have the tougher road of defending our institutions and systems as being flawed but still valuable. Republicans just run on blowing this S up. And that latter strategy is way easier. Although, let's bear in mind the two problems that they have. So the Democrats are like, the system is flawed, but valuable. The issue for them is that they don't often focus as much on fixing the flaws as on maintaining what is valuable. And so I wanna discuss that. And for the Republicans, they just run on blowing this S up. That's like the brand that they're running on, but that's not really what they're doing. The status quo, the establishment, is a big thing with a lot of components. What the Republicans have done, and it's very clever of them, is they've found parts of it to blow the S up that the true power brokers, those with the most influence and money, don't care about being blown up. They're not blowing up like, you know what, we've thought about it, and in fact, corporate taxes should be 50%. They're not blowing it up in that way. They're not doing anything that fundamentally challenges those at the very top of the heap. They're like rearranging the curtains on the status quo, and in a way that gets a reaction, from our side and all that. But this is the two different strategies. Both, one I think is clever, but incredibly dishonest. And then on the Democrat side, it's very fake. Like, yes, there is value to these systems, but that doesn't mean that they don't need large scale reform, and y'all refuse to run on it. That's sort of my problem, Yaz. But what do you think of the points that Jon Stewart's making there?
There's, I think, a lot of these points. First of all, the purity test thing. Why do we expect our leaders to be pure in the first place, right? A lot of that, I think, most recently goes back to what Michelle Obama had to say about, when they go low, we go high. And the Democrats really took that ethos and ran with it for so many years, thinking, you know what, they can be whoever they want to be. We think that they're not good people. We think that they lie. We think that they're hypocrites, whatever it is, right? They can be that, but we can be better than that. And since we are better than that, since we are elevating ourselves to a higher standard, then we can be somewhat untouchable up here. It was almost like they did it defensively, though, rather than just because they wanted to be the better people or the better party. They almost did it so that the Republicans, whenever time came to criticize them, they would have less to criticize them for. That really kind of backfired on them, though, because what it did was it made the Democrats a little bit too timid for what a lot of people would have, the way people would have liked them to interact with the Republicans across the aisle. They would step back and say, you know what, you're right. I'll just, step out of this fight. And rather than fighting for things that probably could have been fought for, they kind of let the Republicans dictate to them how their party was run, who was going to be even in their party. If they cancel one of the Democratic senators or Congress people, they would say, you know what, you're right. I did bad and I should just step out. Whereas on the other side, the Republicans wouldn't do that, right? We would, quote unquote, cancel Republicans who are in office. We would have all this evidence against them, whatever. And then they would say, whatever, I did it. And then they would still keep their seat in office. Nobody made them leave. So that's one part of it, right? I don't think that we should expect our leaders to be pure because they are human beings and human beings are fallible and they are flawed and they're not going to be perfect. And especially people who are operating at such high levels of government, they're not going to be perfect either. They're dealing with a whole level of influences and considerations that we normal people can't even wrap our heads around. So, they're dealing with a lot. I don't expect them to be perfect as long as they can do their job to a certain extent. Another thing is the hypocrisy of all of this that people are commenting on. They're saying, the Democrats hold themselves up to this higher standard. Joe Biden said he wasn't going to pardon his son, and then he just did it anyway. I kind of don't care about that at this point. Like that seems like not the worst thing in the world to me. Everyone in government is a hypocrite. They change their minds all the time. I think they're entitled to do that. And in this case, Joe Biden, he stepped out of the presidential race and the Democrats lost the White House. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't know who Joe Biden cares even about appeasing or appealing to at this point. He's just doing what he has to do and he's going to get out of there and he's not worried about it. And then as far as, maintaining what is valuable without fixing the flaws, I think that's what you said. Yeah, that's kind of been the Democrats' MO for a long time. And if you ask me and a lot of other people, that's probably why they did not perform as well as they were expected to in this last election.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, to some extent, to a very large extent, the reason that's their strategy is that fundamentally they don't think the system needs to be reformed. I think that many elected Democrats, in the same way as elected Republicans, recognize that the system is set up in the way necessary to benefit them and their donors. That's it. I don't think it's just that they don't get strategically, politically, it would be beneficial to run on reform. I think they don't fundamentally want reform, which is the biggest problem. If that was not the issue, if they weren't just trying to protect those who are already doing very well, then the strategy is terrible. Like anybody who thinks that the system is at risk from fascists or whatever is obviously already going to vote for you. That's not who you need to be appealing to. You need to be appealing to those who want something to be changed, maybe offer them an alternative to the insane changes that Donald Trump is proposing. When you click the join button and become a tier 2 member, you get access to all of our weekly top 10 lists. What are you waiting for?